Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. We've got an incredible guest today, and I'm really excited for the insights and ideas they'll be sharing. There are so many practical learnings from the conversation that will make a difference to you, your team, or organization. If your organization is interested in a workshop on this topic of the podcast, feel free to get in touch via our website, yellowwood.ie. If you want to support our podcast, and you'll find a link to our Patreon in the podcast description. Thanks in advance for listening and your support. Now, let's take a different path to success. Welcome to the Workplace Podcast. Today's topic is Manage Yourself to Lead Others. Joining us today to discuss her book and share insights is Margaret C. Andrews, who is a seasoned executive, academic leader, speaker, and instructor. She has created and teaches a variety of leadership courses and professional and executive programs at Harvard University, and is the founder of the Milo Center, a private leadership development firm. Her clients include Amazon, Citi, Continental, Walmart, Wayfair, and the United Nations. She lives in Brookline, Massachusetts. Margaret, welcome to the Workplace Podcast.
So nice to be here.
So I'm going to tell everybody why I like this book. So reading this book, it is very clear, Margaret, why your Milo program was the most popular professional development program in Harvard. And I really like this book. It's the structure of the book, starting with understanding yourself first. So we'll talk about this in the podcast. And then you focus on leading others and managing upwards and understanding the organizational context. What I like about this book and what it sets it apart is that you're looking at different lenses there. So the managing self, that leadership up, and what it really means to what leadership is, what managing teams, what it takes, and really understand that like organizational context and culture. And also what I like about this book are the stories. So we'll talk about Microsoft's Nadella then later on, and we'll talk about the frameworks, at the explanation of your theory, like culture, and all the questions you have for people to reflect on. I think it's a wonderful read for all those interested in leadership. Well done, Margaret. Brilliant read.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I was just saying to myself, I hope my children read this book, because I think it really gives them an insight into when they go into the workplace, then this what it means, what leadership is. And we'll talk about that aspect of role modeling and what influences your leadership style. And I'd like to start off with the role of self-awareness then when it comes to leadership. What is it that people sometimes misunderstand about the role of awareness?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times when we talk about leadership, it's very externally focused, how to lead other people, or how to run a meeting, or, how to motivate other people, etc. But I think it just begins internally. And I actually call it self-understanding, which is in my mind, and this is my definition, and it, different people have different definitions. But to me, in many respects, self-awareness relates a lot to emotional intelligence in a very good way, right? It's understanding the emotion in particular that you're having in that moment and recognizing it, so, whether, oh, I'm feeling so happy or I'm feeling kind of angry at what that person said. Whereas to me, self-understanding is, as I say, it's understanding your backstory.
Yeah.
It's understanding, who are the people and the ideas and the events and the situation that shaped you as a person, because all of that stuff comes out in your leadership. It also includes your values, and these are, you have to really think about this. And I've got, several questions to help people into these values, because when we just go the surface level, we say, oh, family and, being good to my community. And my thought is, well, very oftentimes we have quite different values, or they're in different order than other people might have. So, definition of success in our personal and professional life, also self-awareness. Do you understand your emotions and how you behave with other people when you're feeling these emotions? And then lastly is about what type of feedback you've gotten in your personal and professional life, because that is really about how you do come across.
It seems kind of like self-indulgent that I have to go here, or like, do I really have to do this? Is this all really necessary to do all this self-reflection work?
Well, I always say, it depends on what you want, right? I think that surface level answers give you surface level insight. and deeper work on this, really, I'm going to say wrestling with it gives you much deeper insight. And I will say it does take time. It does take time, and I'm gonna say continued time. So, I have these questions to help people, get at some of these things, and I say, at a very minimum, spend 10 minutes per question, on a first pass, and then go back the next day or over the weekend or something like that, because, I don't say this in the book, but my own answer to question 1 is 6 pages of single-spaced type. Right? It's long because there are a lot of influences in your life, and sometimes ideas or people that have influence you in both a positive and not so positive way, right? And so
Mm.
that's hard to pick apart because when you're younger, lots of people tell you things about yourself, and you think, "Oh, I'm good at this," or "I'm not good at this," and it turns out that may not be true and may never have been true. But when you're younger, you take that as part of who you are.
In my opinion, great leadership is often misunderstood because we're influenced by media or the books that we read or movies that we watch, and we think this is what great leadership is. Can I ask you what you think great leadership is?
Yes. So I think that in many respects, we all have similar and different definitions of it, right? But I'm so glad you brought up the media in terms of what great leadership is,
Yeah.
because I oftentimes get the question in class, well, look at these leaders, and they'll, tick off several leaders that are in the news all the time and brash and bold and things like that. And I'll ask people, well, gosh, how many s Fortune 500 CEOs can you name? And then people think about it for a minute, and then the answer is usually like 1 to 5. I actually was doing a program yesterday, and I asked that question. The maximum was 5. And, so I said, "Right, so if we all know the names of 5 Fortune 500 CEOs, that means we don't know 495. So those 5 are in the news a lot, and so that's what we think. And so we think, "Well, that's the way to behave because, this person is super successful." And I think, yeah, but there's lots and lots of people that are super successful that have a bit of empathy, that listen to other people,
Mm.
and these kinds of things. So, I think of leadership, to me, my definition of it is leading an individual or groups of individuals to a better future. And so I think a lot of times where we get in trouble is that we have different ideas of what better is, right? So if you are running the company, you might say, let's take us left. And if I was running the company, I might say, let's take us right. We both are trying to get to a better future, but we have maybe a different definition or a different way of getting there. So in general, that's what I think it is.
Another thing I think listeners would love about this book is the questions you have of the type of leader that you are. Can you
Mm.
talk us through that just for people to maybe reflect on that? I think it's 3 questions you have
Yeah.
on
3
that. Yeah.
questions. Yeah, so I asked people to, the first question is, "What type of leader are you now?" Right? And these are, what words and phrases would you use to describe yourself, and would other people use to describe you? Sometimes you think this is what they're saying about you, and sometimes this is what they're saying about you. And by the way, this is good stuff, things you're super proud about and things you're not so proud about. So all of those kind of words and phrases. Then the second question is, what type of leader would you like to become? And same kind of thing. What words and phrases would you like to use and have other people use about you as a leader? And then the third question is, all right, what's the delta? What's the difference between the leader you are now and the leader you want to be? And in particular, what types of skills and behaviors will get you from point A to point B? And that's where we start to break it down. And, some people might have 3 things they really think are going to get them to this next level, or some people have 8. And I say, well, pick one to start because you can't really try to do all of them at the same time. And so some people will choose, I'm going to say, the easiest one, the think that, that they are um, most equipped in the moment to tackle that one, and other people will choose one that's gonna be the hardest one for them because they realize, well, that one's gonna have the most leverage.
I'm glad you mentioned that you might have a huge shopping list of things that would much make a good leader or a great leader, to put it that way. And this is where habits and behaviors and feedback is really important. And usually when we start something, then for the first time, we feel like we're failing a little bit. Now, this
Mhm.
is what you brought into the book then. And I love the concept of the S curve. Now, our Irish listeners will love to discover that Irishman, Charles Handy, was one of the first to see the relation of this mathematical function. There is the sigmoid
Sigmoid curve, yes,
curve.
so
Yeah.
if you're a biologist, you may know that.
Yeah. So, this is the relation to individual and organization development. Now, I promote this S curve the whole time, and it was only through reading your book that I discovered that was Charles
Yeah,
Handy
it was
passed
Charles Handy
away.
was the first
Yeah,
one that
recently. Yeah,
started doing that. It was brilliant, right? Because that is the way it works, and we don't
yeah,
talk about that.
yeah. So we know what the S curve is. Our listeners don't. What is the S curve?
So the S curve, the idea of the S curve is that when we are making a change, say you want to develop a new behavior, something like you want to stop interrupting people and let them finish their sentence, or you want to delegate more effectively and not jump in and save the day, whatever it is, right? We all have different ones. That in the very beginning, you're not gonna be good at it at all, right? This new thing, because it's not your habit. You don't know how to do it. You don't necessarily really know what success looks like. So
Mm,
in the very beginning, you're gonna flit around a little bit. You're going to, maybe read some books. You might search the internet for that.
yeah.
You might find somebody at work or in your personal life that does this really well, and you might talk to them. Then you start to try to do it and you're going to fall down a lot. And that is just the way it works that you're going to try it, you're going to, go too far left and then you're going to next time you're going to go too far right, right? And I think that there's a little bit of that pendulum in there. So the idea of an S curve is that when you're learning a new skill or behavior, you get better slowly and then quickly. And then right, it's everything kind of comes together and then you level off. And I think many of us may have had this, this experience where you are working on something and then realize, oh, wow, 3 months ago, I would have done this so differently. I am doing
Mm,
something, but it's,
yeah.
those first few weeks, few months, whatever it is, not as pretty.
And that's what turns people off, isn't it? Sometimes of that path
It's
is like, oh, this is not comfortable, or I'm failing here. And we go back into that comfort zone rather than going into that stretch zone or the growth mindset aspect of it, isn't it?
It absolutely. In fact, I think that high achieving people have the hardest time sometimes at the S
Yeah.
curve because when you're trying something new, whatever it is, you're not going to do it well. And so high achieving people don't like to mess up. They don't like to fail, and especially in front of other people. And by the way, the higher up in an organization you are, the more people are going to see you mess up. And that's hard, right? It's really hard. But that is the way that it works. So a lot of times what'll happen is people will try it and they will bomb, right? And it's
Yeah.
embarrassing. And so they will think to themselves or say to somebody else, well, I'm just not good at this, or I feel very inauthentic when I'm doing
Yeah.
this. And then they'll rationalize it by saying, "Hey, listen, I got here all, where I am today because you and not behaving the other way." And this is where I love Marshall Goldsmith and his saying, "Yes, but what got you here won't get you there." So you kind of have to push on through.
So just on that, because I like this part in the book where, well, what happens if you don't evolve? So as high
Mhm.
achievers, then like this is where there could be a severe derailment in your career. And you mentioned this in the book.
Yeah, yeah. I think that a career derailment is something you might be as much as fired, but you might be demoted, you passed over. It's sort of the idea of derailment is just like a train, a train that
Yeah.
derails, leaves the track, doesn't get to its destination, and usually it leaves a mess in its wake. And
Yeah.
that's kind of similar to a career derailment. It leaves a mess in its wake. And The thing about derailment is a lot of those signs were there all along, but for a period of time, because a lot of companies see this too, but they think, "Oh, this person is so valuable over here because of what they're doing. We're just we're not gonna worry about it. Oh, we're gonna look the other way," etcetera. But then the behavior is causing such problem in the team or in the organization that ultimately they get rid of the person, and it's a shock to that person.
Yeah, and it's hard to get your confidence back as well then, and then it feels like the S curve is going the other way, and this is where you tell a story in the book about Christine. Now, I
Mhm,
have
mhm.
experienced this many times in myself in leadership development programs where people don't engage in self-awareness or do the bare minimum, are so focused on their phone that they just, as you would say in the book, I think just writing bullet points where you were looking for something in more depth. So it was kind of very much surface level from Christine. So if I'm that type of person and I'm taking a leadership development course, what advice would you give to people?
Well, I think in certain situations there that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Mm,
That you can lay out a whole buffet, but if people aren't ready for it, they're not going to partake. And I think that was what was going on. So for people that don't know the story, it was somebody that was, in an executive program and, kind of came in and was, complaining about her team and how, she had lots of different problems, etcetera. And so when we went into the part about self-understanding, she really just wouldn't engage with the questions, right? And
yeah,
she was constantly on her phone and when I'd come over and say, "Hey, why don't you work on it a little bit longer?" At some point she kind of got annoyed. She picked up her phone and she walked out of the room. And then she came back later, but and what I noticed was that in every breakout that we had, she was, super opinionated, telling people what they
yeah,
should do and where they were wrong and these kinds of things. And so I thought, wow, this is somebody who doesn't understand themselves and also has no interest in it. And I'm seeing this. But what was interesting was that somebody came up to me at the end of the program and said, "Well, that was a masterclass in how I do not want to be." Right? They
yeah.
were and they said, they said just watching that just, was kind of horrible, but it was a good example of what you don't want to do. And, but I also think too, like that other saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. That, when somebody is ready, which I oftentimes get people in my program who, are, I'm gonna say, mid to senior level, and what they've been doing is not working the way it used
Yeah.
to. They're kinda spinning their wheels or they've hit a wall, and said, "Wow, that hurts. I don't wanna do that again." Then they're ready for it. But I think you can't force somebody.
And from a technical point of view, that's where I would argue for more long-term programs then, because the person
Mhm.
would be ready at some point during, whether it's a 12-month or 18-month program, that if you do that, you have that module then later on where they've had time to reflect and kind of going, you know what? You may have a point here that still coming up with these challenges, you know. And I've often found out where people you think they're going to derail actually get themselves on track because they
Yes,
start
yes.
realizing the value of the program and where feedback comes in, and especially peer feedback as well, I think is really important where people, you know, start giving them that common feedback, and then something
Yes.
suddenly a light bulb emerges there. And this is where I like to move into next because just on that light bulb moment, then you talk about the role of emotions in self-management then. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because you were saying that you get that self-understanding, then you go to insight, then you get to self-management, and then that has a bit of a transformational impact, and then that leads into another loop, you know, the S curve again, maybe, and then you get into insight, and then you move along there again, isn't it? There's something about understanding the role of emotion then.
Yeah, yeah, because I think, what I talk about is that each new level of your career needs a new level of you, right?
Yeah.
And if you think back on your career, you're not the same as when you took your first job or your second job or got your first promotion or whatever, right? You learn things along the way. And so sometimes the learnings are harder when you're younger or earlier in your career, but a lot of times they're harder when you are more advanced in your career because you are so used to succeeding doing things the way you've done them. So,
Yeah.
but with emotions, when we're learning something new, a lot of times we're having emotional reactions. We're embarrassed that we just, made this mistake in front of the whole group or something like that. So, emotions are, if we're not aware of our emotions, then our emotions are oftentimes driving our behavior. And I oftentimes will ask people, well, how aware are you of your emotions when you're having one in the moment? And a lot of people kind of think for a minute and go, I'm not sure. I'm like, well, then I think you know. Right? If you're not sure, then I think you know. But another question is, if you're with somebody, who knows that you're mad first? You or the other
Yeah.
person, right? If it's
Yeah.
you, you're feeling that anger or jealousy or sadness, whatever it is that
Yeah.
is rising. But if it's them, maybe you're not. Maybe you're not so aware of that. But in self-management, a lot of times we're replacing one habit or way of doing something with another.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's stopping, it's taking a step back. If you have a difficult, I'll say, relationship with somebody and they oftentimes, do something in a meeting that triggers you, you have a habitual way of responding to that. And so
Yeah.
when you're self-managing, you're thinking about, well, what are, I don't know, 20 other ways I could respond to that? And it
Yeah.
may be, you pound the table, you get up and yell, you walk out of the room, or you say, could you repeat that question, please? Or, right. I mean, there's 100 things that you could do. So you might think about those, and then in the moment, they're ready, right? And so you might think,
Yeah.
"Well, I don't wanna pound the table, that would make
Yeah.
me look, not very professional." But you've thought about it because you know what? Sometime there might be a time when that is the appropriate, way of doing things. So, rarely, but
Yeah.
sometimes it may be.
And this is where I love that you quote Susan David, the author of Emotional Agility. Emotions are data, not directives. And that's what I like in this book. Some people call it emotional management, emotional regulation. It really is, as you say here, the ability to act in the long term best interest, consistent with your deepest values. That's from Stephen Stosny, I think. There's many great quotes in that book. And just on that emotional agility or management, even myself, for example, I'll be quite curious about what is that emotion teaching
Mhm.
me.
Yeah, what is it flashing for you? Yes.
Yeah, and really what it is, like in my work as a mediator, then like that is pinpointing something I'm trying to defend or protect. So especially if I feel so strongly, it's just holding that out in front of you, just kind of go, what is that? And I think that's sometimes we're at such a pace as leaders that we don't take that time out to really be curious about the emotions. Then you have to get that balance right, don't you? Because you can't be so reflective that you're not being proactive and taking action. So it is finding the right balance, and that's where the agility comes in, isn't it?
It is, and I think, that's where I think of, like, the power of the pause, right? So if you send me an email that
Yeah,
makes me have a reaction, the best thing I can do is get up, go for a quick walk, or go get a
yeah,
drink of water. Do not respond right away because you're having some reaction.
yeah,
I think I sent one email one time where I just, hit
yeah,
respond right away, and I've never done it again because it
yeah,
felt so bad, afterwards, like, "Oh my gosh, I have to apologize to this person," but it was that experience that said, "I don't ever wanna do that again," right? Let me, go away from it because when you come back, you think a little differently, and a lot of people say, well, if you're in a meeting, you can't get up and go for a walk or something, and I
yeah,
said, "But you can do other things." You can say, "Hey, I think we need a bio break," right? Or something, or my favorite is, many of us have a water bottle. And, so if somebody says something that really sets you off and you're having a reaction and you know that, pick up your water bottle, take a couple swigs, right? It gives you just few seconds to collect yourself, and that's where I think, I also talk about in the book the bridge between self-understanding and self-management. A big part of that is mindfulness, right?
Mm.
It's being mindful of how do I want to show up, or how do I want this person to feel, or what do I want in this situation, right? It's being aware of goals, and then in the moment, being able to act in accordance with that goal, right? As opposed to pulling out that habitual behavior that actually takes you further away from it. I know, easier said than done, but with practice, it does get a bit better.
And that's that habit as well as emotional regulation. And I think you quote then that this, I think, comes from Viktor Frankl, that the space
Mhm.
between the stimulus and the response. And that's where really where the leadership happens. And it's that choice then that we make to say, listen, I'm going to compose myself here.
Absolutely. We oftentimes think that if somebody asks you a question, you have to say the answer right away, right? I think
Yeah.
we're coming to the point now where people realize, okay, we need more innovation. And if you're the leader, you probably don't have the answer, right? Because it is new. And so your role is to bring it out, from other people. But I think the same thing is true that, that if you ask me a question, I have to respond, within a nanosecond. And the point is no. I remember seeing a couple of speakers where somebody asks a question, you can tell they're thinking, right? They're composing it in their head. And they're probably weighing, well, it could be this or it could be this, etc. And you don't have to respond right away. You can think about it, or you can say, I have, 5 different thoughts on that. Let me think about it more and get back to you, or, or something like that. Or if you're with people where you really can brainstorm, you could lay out those 5 different things and say, let's kick that around and see what we think.
That's what I like. The title of your book is Manage Yourself to Lead Others. And what a lot of people forget is part of management is utilizing the resources that we have, and then leading then is different, and that's where the adaptive and technical challenge comes in. The technical challenge is who are your subject matter experts, who are trusted sources of information or trusted advisors, and let's go to there because no CEO is not going to be an expert in all areas.
You can't,
Yeah,
even your data may be old, right? Things have
yeah,
changed.
yeah. So speaking of leading others, then right. Some people might be listening as, why would anybody or what reason would people follow me then? And you give some guidance on that. If we were to choose those reasons, what might be they be?
Well, I think, they need a reason to follow you, right? If you wanna think about it, it's kinda what's in it for them too. That, it means that they are part of something bigger, right? That they understand their role in the system, right? There's that old, um, story about JFK visiting NASA when they were trying to put a man on the moon. And, he walks around and he talks to everybody, and he always said, "Well, what are you doing? What's your role here, etcetera." And so he's doing that with everybody. And one guy says, it's the janitor. And the guy answers him. He said, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. President, we are putting a man on the moon, right? So what he understood that his role was, as part of this big role. And I think
Mm,
people they want to know, like, what is the grand vision, and what's my role in that grand vision?
yeah.
And then why should they work with you in particular? And a lot of that comes with, how you make people feel. It comes from your track record, your reputation, but a big part of it is how you make people feel.
I might just segue to a previous podcast with a person called Zach Mercurio, talks about the power of mattering. And that's where he talks about people
Mhm.
needed to feel noticed, affirmed, and needed. Like what you do means something, it contributes. And so I'd signpost people to that. But also, what I'd like to do is signpost people to your zigzag chart. That's the working style differences. And I think that's absolutely amazing for people to really, if you want to lead a team, you have to know who's on your team and what are the differences in your style and how to get the best out of the team. Can you just let us know what is the zigzag chart?
Yeah, so the zigzag chart is something where you take things that are you might think are opposites, like
Yeah.
extrovert, introvert, big picture, details, these kinds of things. And so I have one that is in the book and, that people can download. And, but you can also create your own.
Yeah.
And so the idea is you can use it a couple of different ways. One is that, and this is how I started with it, was that I was working with somebody and I just felt like we were talking right past each other. Right. That
Yeah.
we were just like I would say black and he'd say, right, yeah, white. And I'd say, no, 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 black. And he'd say, yeah, right,
Yeah.
white. And I just thought, "Oh my gosh, what is going on here?" So I kind of put together something like this. What you do is, there's, from left to right on each of
Yeah.
these, and you go through and yourself and say, "Where are you? Where am I on this? Am I more of an introvert, an extrovert, etc." And then you sort of draw the zigzag to connect them.
Yeah.
Then you think to the best of your knowledge, what is the other person, right? And so you do theirs and draw their zigzag. And so you see these two sometimes overlapping lines. And the point is that it's not gonna tell you the answer, right? But it's gonna give you some context, it's gonna give you some
Mm.
information, and sometimes the problem may be that we're very far apart, right? And,
Yeah.
so, like, in the situation that I had, I was big picture, and the person I was working with was very detailed, and so just I had to change the way that I communicated, right? I had to start with A, then B, then C, then D.
Yeah.
Whereas I used to just come in with D, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, where did that come from? And,
Yeah.
but sometimes it comes from being close together, right? That we both like the big picture, but we have different big pictures or something like that. So it can be very helpful. The other thing, which was, like I kind of discovered by accident, I was explaining the zigzag chart to a friend of mine, and we were on a Zoom call, and I showed it to him. I had it up there
Yeah.
and then I see that he's annotating it. He's going through and he's putting a little mark like where he is. And and I said, "Oh, John, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I just want to see how long it would take to fill this out, right?" And so then I look at it and he is one of the biggest introverts I've ever known. And he had his mark for himself closer to extrovert. And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, wait a minute." I said, I've known you for, 20 years, and I would not put your mark where you did." And he said, "Oh, yeah." He said, I do." He said, "I love working alone." But he said, "The real magic happens when we get together." And I
Wow.
thought, there you go. Right. So I just thought, well, these could be really good icebreakers as well for teams, right? Because I would have put him completely to the side of introvert. But when he explained it, I thought,
Yeah.
"I get it. I get what you're saying."
This is on page 114 in the book if people are interested. So we have captured a few are extroverted, introverted, debate versus action, competitive versus collaborative, you know, data driven, intuition driven, goal orientated, process orientated, optimistic, pessimistic, organized, disorganized, risk seeking, risk avoiding, present focused, future focused. So they're the kind of things that the zigzag chart brings in. So this brings me to the next point then, because what you're doing there is really understanding each other and you're giving feedback to each other. And this is what I like in the book. You talk about connected listening. What is connected listening and the role of feedback then?
Yeah, and actually connected listening is from a great book that I use in teaching a lot called Real Influence by Gulson. And, the idea of connected listening is that you are connecting with this person, right? You are understanding as they talk about it, kind of they're there. Where are they starting from? But it's also, sort of different levels of listening that very oftentimes we're avoidant listening. We're not, we're on our phone. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Right. If you say, well, what did I just ask you? You'd be like, "Well, I don't know." But then, a lot of times we think that when somebody comes to us with an issue that they want, that the best way that we can help them is to solve it for them. So, you come in and say, "Oh, I have a problem with my boss." And I say, "Well, have you tried this or did you try this?" Right. but that's not I'm not actually listening to you, right? And oftentimes that's not what you want, right? Connected listening is letting you get your story out, right? So if you say I have a problem with my boss, I might say, "Oh, tell me more. What is he or she doing that is, is causing the problem?" Then you tell me a little bit more, and I say, "Oh, well, how does that make you feel when that happens?" Or, so I'm getting it out of you. So you're hearing yourself as well. That you may get to the point where you say, "Well, gosh, Margaret, what should I do?" Right? But you can't get there. The person that you're talking to is the one that decides that.
So, if I to understand that, that's where I would see the connected listening as like reflective coaching, where
Mm,
you're listening, you're asking questions, because there's sometimes people misunderstand coaching as like it's a spectrum. So it's like directive coaching, which is kind of very similar to mentoring, where
mhm.
reflective coaching is more about the person has the answers themselves. And this approach of the connected listening then is they understand the problem, they understand the context as well. And then they're probably better off coming up with the solutions. And then if the solutions are fit for purpose, then you can guide them one way or another. But then they're more empowered than to do that. And that actually saves a lot of time, doesn't it?
It does, and I also think of connected listening, happens in problem solving. So, you may be, making a decision and somebody on your team comes in and said, "I totally disagree with this," or, whatever, and your first reaction might be, "What? What? How dare you?"
Yeah.
kind of thing. But, connected listening is saying, "Why?" And then they tell you and you think, "Oh, well, tell me more." Kind of where does that
Yeah.
come from? "Tell me more" is one of the most helpful, phrases that we can say because usually there's more behind it, right? And so they may have some experience that is quite different from ours that is saying, flashing red, right? Do not go there. And you know what? They might be right. Or it may be something that it was a slightly different situation, but you are understanding it and,
Yeah.
and listening, because very oftentimes when you are making decisions as a leader, lots of people aren't gonna agree with you, and that can be hard. I do believe that our job as a leader is to not try to make everyone happy all the time, right? Because you'd never be able to make a decision, but to try not to make everybody unhappy too. But you have to take in a lot of, information and then make a decision with that, and sometimes we make it quickly and we don't hear those other things, and then later on, something goes wrong, and the person who disagreed had the reason why it was gonna go wrong, and we didn't hear it.
I'm going to add this from my creative partner, Luke Monaghan. We call them the TED questions.
Mm.
So, you said, tell me more, explain to me, describe. So these are the TED questions because they're open questions, aren't
Yeah.
they? And then you mentioned then is you can't keep everybody happy. But this brings me to the point of the leadership gaps then. What are the kind of the typical ones? Because you've run this course so many times. So from your
Mhm.
expertise, like what are the main gaps from your experience that people face when it comes to leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting if you've read the, book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Lencioni, right? He has a great framework, and he basically says that if you have a problem with a team, look down the triangle that he has, and it's always about trust, right?
Yeah.
I oftentimes think that, if there was a triangle here, it would go down to not understanding ourselves, not understanding our reactions, not understanding, why we believe certain things. So, I oftentimes use it as a diagram of like, I call them nested eggs, right? And there's, the first egg is understanding yourself. And then the bigger egg, which is still connected, is managing yourself. And then it is, understanding other people. And, it keeps going. But the thread, the common thing is understanding yourself.
So, and this is where in the book, then you talk about it can be, the knowing doing gap, maybe not understanding the role, your role as leadership, poor modeling, which I'd like to talk about, fear of conflict, being overwhelmed, so focused on your own insecurity, because we mightn't develop people because they think they're going to steal our job or whatever. And what I like about the book then is to talk about modeling. This is an important part because it's going to move us into the culture piece as well. But how I show up in my team is how I'm going to show up in the other teams that are interconnected
Mm,
in the
mhm.
company. And this is what it means to be a good organizational citizen. Okay. And I think that modeling is this is how we have an argument. This is how we have a debate. This is how we're going to show up. And at least everybody's clear and that's psychological safety that's there. So can you just talk to us a little bit more about that role of modeling?
Yeah, and I will also tie it in with the knowing, doing gap and vulnerability, right? Because I
Brilliant.
think they're all related. So one of the biggest things that I find in leadership and where there are gaps is that we know something, but we don't do it. And
Mm,
so, for example, I'll ask people in a classroom, I'll say, how many of you know that you should listen to people, let them finish their sentence, not cut them off, these kinds of things. Pretty much every hand goes up. And I said, okay, now keep your hand up if you do that all the time. Right. And I'm lucky if there's one person raising their hand. And so I, ask people, why don't you do that? And so, they think they hem and haw. But the thing is that is the knowing doing gap when we know something, but we don't do it. That we know we should, try spend some time, understanding ourselves, reflecting. We should, think about the type of person that we want to be, but
yeah.
we don't always do it. And I've definitely had people in my programs, when we're talking about something, whether it's emotional intelligence or this, that, or the other, and they'll kind of give you that, yeah, 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 I know. And I say, "Well, yeah, 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 do you do it?" And they kind of look at me, "Oh, no." I'm like, "Okay, then you don't get credit for it, right? You don't get credit for knowing something. You get credit for doing it." And, um, and this goes to one of the big points, I think, in the program and in the book is that we judge ourselves by our intentions. I intend to be a good teammate. I intend to be a good leader, but other people judge us by our behaviors. And so, for example, if I know I should listen, that people will connect with me more, that they will trust me more, but I don't do it, my intention for being a good listener or being a good boss go out the window with that because you don't get credit for knowing it. You get credit for doing it. And that is part of that modeling, right? Is and also in going back to the S curves that when you're learning a new behavior, it's helpful to tell people what you're working on, which to some people is like, oh, I'm not going to tell them that, right? I'm going to look like, I'm too vulnerable. And I said, well, but they'll actually help you. The overwhelming majority of people will be very helpful because
Yeah.
in truth, if you get better at what you're trying to get better at, it makes the relationship better, right? And they want
Yeah.
that too. It helps their performance. So if you tell people, they're pretty likely to say, "Hey, you did it in that meeting," or "Yeah, I kind of missed," or something like that, and they
Yeah.
will help you. And by the way, you are modeling what it means to improve. So when you tell somebody else, "Hey, to get to the next level, here are the things that you need to work on," they've already seen you struggle and realize that's part of the process.
Speaking of struggling, Margaret, and this is where the part of the final chapters you talk about organizational culture and context. And it's really good to know about your surroundings. When people talk about culture, it's often very woolly. Like, what's the best way to define it?
Yeah, so I think a very standard way of looking at it, which I think captures a lot of it, is it's the way we do things around here, right? Because there's certain patterns to the way you do things or you think about things. And there's a much longer definition that Ed
Yeah.
Schein from MIT uses, right? It's a shared pattern of assumptions that, have worked
Yeah.
well enough that people have adapted them. But really what it comes down to is it's about the way we think. There are these very deeply held assumptions about the way the world works. Is it fair? What's the nature of hierarchy? What is the way we find the truth? Is it that we explore it together, or do we fight like hell and see who
Yeah.
wins the debate? Right? There's different organizations do it differently, and very oftentimes the culture comes down to the founder. If you are in a startup or one that is, not too far outside of the founder doing it,
Yeah.
it's probably the personality of the founder. I always say if they like dogs, it's a dog friendly place. Right? If they were night owls, it's a night owl kind of place. If they were party animals, there's a lot of parties. Right? And these sound very superficial, but they're getting at this way we do things around here, and it's getting underneath it to say why. Right? It's the way, the person or the team that founded it oftentimes think about the way the world works.
So if I was to put a layperson's approach in this, it's basically a representation of the founder's personality, its organizational personality or organization culture.
I think of it that way. I
Yeah.
think of, people have personalities and organizations have cultures, right? In a way,
Yeah.
it's very similar. It's kind of the personality of the organization. And if you work for two uh, places, two organizations in the same industry, whether it's a not for profit or for profit or, tech or entertainment, whatever, they will be different because
Yeah.
they're same industry. They might literally be down the street from each other, but they were founded differently. And the other is that almost every organization early in its life goes through some near death experience, right? When, they lose a client or the numbers aren't adding up, etc. And what's interesting is what they do about it because
Yeah.
the example I often use is, company A, company B, both in the same industry, same situation, both lose a major client. Company A says, we're going to do whatever it takes to get that client back, right? So they just flip everything upside down, get that
Yeah.
client back, etc. So if it works, becomes baked into your culture. So the next time
Yeah.
something like that happens, you repeat it, right? This is how
Yeah.
it gets baked in. Whereas company B might say, well, we never want to be in that situation again. Let's let that client go. Let's go get three smaller clients, right? Just so
Yeah.
we want to diversify this portfolio, never be in this
Yeah.
situation again. If that works, that gets baked into their culture, right? So you start to see how when we do something, if it works, then, oh, that's the way we should do it. And if it doesn't work in the early life of a company, the company's out of business. So,
Yeah. And that's what people sometimes what's written on the wall are the values versus the stories that are shared, what the
mhm,
organization actually rewards when it comes to promotions or pay rises or projects that
absolutely.
people be involved with. That's really where it's at. And that's where that modeling comes back to then again as well. And this is where you introduce us to culture makers and culture takers. No,
Mhm.
I've never heard that before. Can you tell our listeners what's the difference?
Yeah. So essentially, when you join an organization, not right now, I'm talking about large organizations, right?
Yeah.
So, large organizations. So, if you join a company, you are joining a culture. You are going to be assimilated into it. So, you are a culture taker. You are taking
Yeah.
that culture.
Yeah.
If you are a culture maker, you are somebody who makes the culture or can change the culture.
Mm.
And so the idea here is that the overwhelming majority of us are culture makers, excuse me, culture takers,
Yeah.
and that very few people in a large organization are culture makers. And in general, it's the CEO. And it can't be delegated. The CEO can't
Yeah.
turn to the operations officer or HR and say,
Yeah.
"Fix this culture," because it really has to. Because it's so layered. It goes through everything. And you talked about how the values. Because a lot of times Shine talks about these values are in two ways. One are our espoused values, right, which is what you see on the wall, and they're actually usually aspirational, and I'm not saying that as a dig, it's just this is what
Yeah.
they're trying
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
and then there's espoused enacted values, which
Yeah.
are what you really do and what value that shows, and one of my favorite examples of that was I know somebody who worked for an organization that talked so much about, work-life balance and, taking care of yourself, And then they had this big award that was called the Above and Beyond Award, which is for people that worked all night, every night, for
Yeah.
weeks on end. And I'm like, wow, there's a big disconnect there, right? You're saying one thing, but you are absolutely rewarding something different.
So just on leaders then. So this is connected with the connected listing of Satya Nadella, the leadership of Microsoft, and he went on a listening tour. And not only that, he recommended a book, then wonderful book, I might say, Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. Could you just talk about that? Because I think that's a fascinating way where it really turned the ship there.
Microsoft, everybody knows, and Bill Gates started it.
Yeah,
Very hard charging, very cerebral,
yeah,
take no prisoners kind of attitude. So it was not always easy to work there, but people were pretty richly rewarded, especially in the very beginning. And then when Gates left and Ballmer took over, they were kind of coming from behind in certain areas, and one of the things they wanted to do was change the culture, but it was ultimately not effective. So in when Nadella takes over, he says, his wife hands him this book and says, "Hey, you're a leader. I think you better learn this stuff." So the book is about the growth mindset and about how individuals and organizations can have growth mindset or fixed mindset. And what he realized was that the organization had kind of a fixed mindset. So in order for me to win, you had to lose. Right. It was,
yeah,
and it was, there's a very famous cartoon that showed the cultures of all these different organizations. I don't remember all of them. They were Apple and Oracle and things, but the one with Microsoft showed a bunch of people in an org chart, and they all had guns pointing at the other places, right? And that was the
yeah,
whole idea of, I'm gonna shoot you so I could win. And so they were bogged down in internal fights, and of course they missed markets and things like that. So when Nadella came on, he realizes, oh, I think we need to fix this. And I remember when Nadella was, chosen as CEO, I mean, I think the collective was, "Who's that?" Right? I think they expected they were gonna get some high flyer from some other, organization, but actually Nadella was in a really good spot because he knew the culture of Microsoft. So he knew right where the levers were, right? And he had access to all of them. Right? So he listened, he modeled the behavior that he was
yeah,
looking for. He was tended to be a lot more empathetic, and
yeah,
people notice this. He also, I think it was, both operational and symbolic that when people at very high levels, including on his senior leadership team, couldn't
yeah,
model the new ways of doing things, he let them go.
yeah,
He pulled, a couple of people up from, much, lower ranks and put them on the team saying,
yeah.
"This is what I want." So he was, there was a whole lot of things going on, but he modeled it. He changed the way that people were rewarded. It wasn't always the person with the sharp elbows, it was somebody who
Yeah.
kinda lived what they were trying to do. And, they've had a lot of success in that. And I love
I
that
think.
story because
Mhm.
it's one of the rare examples of a
Yeah.
successful, organizational change.
And I remember meeting him years ago. There was only like he addressed a very small crowd many years ago at a conference, and I was like, "How are there more people here?" But he didn't have that star power when he
Mm.
came in.
Mhm.
Yet talk about a culture maker there, and really influenced from the top. Then this is how we're going to communicate, and often I say to people, an agile organization is a learning organization. To
Mhm.
learn, you have to listen. And I
Mhm.
think that's the real thing that I'm coming across in this book is we really need to listen to ourselves, listen to the team, and listen to the organization. Like just on that, then some people might be listening to the heartbeat of the organization here and kind of go, maybe I'm not liking
Mhm.
what I'm hearing. So should I stick or should I
Mhm.
go? You have some advice on that or some questions for the sake because you say in the book if I think it depends.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things, especially with culture. If you can kind of look at the organization and ask yourself kind of which elements of the culture appeal to me, right?
Yeah.
I like this, etc. And it's really from your own perspective, not what the company says, right? But what you see, what you've experienced,
Yeah.
etc. And then ask yourself, because if you've done the internal work, then you ask yourself about, well, how do my values align with the organization's values, right? This is
Yeah.
especially the enacted values.
Mm.
As I say, a lot of times companies will say, "Oh, we're gonna change, we're gonna be more collaborative." And then you see the top leadership team is not collaborative, or that they promote the most sharp-elbowed person the next time who is not collaborative at all, and everyone goes, "Ugh, we're not this is not really what we're doing." So, do your own values align with that in some way? And ask yourself, well, what does it take to succeed in this organization? Is that something that aligns with my values and my own definition of success, right? So this is where all of the work on understanding ourselves comes back in. The other thing I think that's really important is to ask yourself if there are people in the organization that you admire and or can learn from. Right? And they may not be your direct boss, they may not even be in your unit, but, when you think about that, you might wanna model them more, or even try to get on a project with them,
Yeah.
right? So you can get a little bit closer to it. The other thing I ask people is, is working in this organization negatively impacting your mental health? If it
Yeah.
is, if you're, really ruminating about it all the time, because I think that we spend a lot of time at work, and we spend a lot of time when we're not at work thinking about work. And if
Mm.
it's ruining the rest of your life, it's probably at some point not worth it.
Yeah.
And I also think that when we are in the wrong organization, there are times when you can't leave right away,
Yeah.
The economy isn't what it should be, or you're the sole breadwinner, or loads and loads of reasons why this could be. And so that's why I do focus a lot on learning, and part of the learning is, what am I learning about myself in this type of organization so I don't make this mistake again?
So we've been listening to Margaret C. Andrews, author of Manage Yourself to Lead Others, Why Great Leadership Begins with Self-Understanding. Margaret, if people were to find out more about you and your wonderful book, how might they do so?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. So the book is available, in most places books are sold. Certainly all the online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, which by the way, supports your local bookstores. And you can find out more. The place I hang out on social media is LinkedIn more than anything else, and I am Margaret C. Andrews on LinkedIn. Turns out there's lots of Margaret Andrews, but only a few Margaret C. Andrews. And also my website, which is margaretandrews.com.
Margaret, it has been an absolute joy to hear your insights and expertise. Thank you so much for joining the Workplace Podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I super enjoyed this discussion, so thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Workplace Podcast. I really appreciate you being part of the conversation. If you found value in today's episode and want to support what we're building here, you'll find a link to our Patreon in the description. As a workplace expert, I'm here to help you resolve your workplace dilemmas. If your organization could benefit from my expertise, feel free to get in touch via our website, yellowwood.ie. Yellowwood, your external learning and development partner. Take a different path to success in your career, leadership, team, and organization. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you soon.